My name is Elena Brooks, and I am 29 years old. My mother told everyone at my sister's engagement dinner that I had failed. She didn't whisper it. She didn't soften it. She didn't look at me when she said it. She said it like a conclusion, like a summary she'd rehearsed. We were seated at a long table in a private room, white tablecloth pressed so flat it looked stiff, candles placed just far enough apart to feel deliberate. I sat quietly with my hands folded in my lap while my mother spoke about my sister's future. She talked about success, about stability, about how proud she was. Then she paused, smiled politely, and added that not every child turns out the same. Some people, she said, just don't reach their potential. Her eyes moved around the table. Not to me. Never to me. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I didn't lift my head. I sat there while the words settled into the room like dust. This was my sister's engagement dinner, and I was the failure being passed around the table as context. A comparison. A cautionary note. I felt the silence press in on my chest, thick and heavy, like the air had decided I wasn't worth breathing for. Then, from across the table, my sister's fiancé turned toward me. He leaned slightly forward. His voice dropped just enough to change the temperature of the room. And he said, "Wait, you're the..." He stopped. And everything went silent. Before I tell you what happened next, take a moment and like this video. Subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to protect you. And comment where you're watching from, especially if your family ever made you feel small in a room where you were supposed to belong. Because if you've ever sat quietly while someone rewrote your life out loud, this story is for you. In my family, failure isn't just personal. It's embarrassing. It's something to manage. Something to explain away before it reflects badly on everyone else. My mother believes success is visible. It has to be announced. It has to be recognized by strangers. Titles matter. Salaries matter. Homes with enough rooms to impress guests matter. If you can't point to something that looks impressive from the outside, then in her mind, it doesn't exist. Quiet success doesn't count. Private progress doesn't count. Stability that can't be bragged about doesn't count. My sister fit the picture perfectly. She always had. She moved through life the way my mother taught her to. Degrees that framed well. Jobs with names people nodded at. Friends who looked polished. A life that translated easily into conversation. I was the opposite. I was the child who didn't explain herself. The one who didn't announce plans before they were finished. The one who didn't ask for approval before making decisions. And in my family, that made me suspicious. If you couldn't see what I was building, then I must not be building anything. So they filled in the blanks themselves. They decided I was lost. That I was struggling. That I was behind. That I had wasted time. They told themselves this story so often that by the time of that dinner, it felt like fact. My sister was the win. I was the problem. And the engagement dinner was their stage. The room was expensive in a way that wanted to be noticed. Dark wood panels. Soft lighting that made skin glow and flaws disappear. Chairs upholstered in fabric that felt heavy under your fingers. Servers moved quietly, refilling glasses before anyone asked, like they already knew who mattered. My parents loved places like this. They believed the room you sat in said everything that needed to be said about you. I was seated 2 chairs away from my sister. Close enough to hear every word. Far enough to stay out of the center. It was subtle. Always subtle. My sister sat beside her fiancé, glowing, confident, already comfortable being the focus. My mother leaned toward her constantly, adjusting details, smoothing moments, proud in a way that was almost physical. My father spoke loudly, laughed easily, told stories that made my sister sound exceptional even when they were ordinary. No one asked me how I was. When someone glanced in my direction, my mother filled the space before I could speak. "Elena's still figuring things out," she said gently, like she was being kind. My father added something about patience. About how not everyone is built for pressure. He said it with a smile, like he was being generous by lowering expectations. I nodded once and kept my eyes on the table. I had learned how to disappear without leaving. The candle flame flickered near my glass. The smell of food hung in the air, rich and heavy. Somewhere beyond the private room, Laughter drifted in, muffled by walls that were meant to keep important people separate. The room felt like it was watching me. My sister enjoyed it. I could tell by the way she leaned back slightly, the way she smiled when our parents spoke. She didn't defend me. She didn't need to. In her world, everything was exactly as it should be. My mother made comments that sounded harmless if you didn't know how to listen. "She's independent," she said once, resting her hand lightly on my arm. "She likes doing things her own way." The way she said it made independence sound like a flaw. "She doesn't really like to talk about work," she added. "She's very private." Private, in my family, was another word for lacking. People nodded, smiled politely, moved on. They spoke about me like I wasn't sitting there. Like I was a detail that needed explaining so no one would ask questions later. I stayed silent on purpose. Silence was the only thing I still controlled in that room. I had learned a long time ago that explaining myself only made things worse. Every explanation turned into an argument. Every defense became proof that I was insecure. So I stopped offering them. Silence kept me intact. But silence doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. As the conversation flowed around me, pieces of the past pressed in, sharp and unwanted. The family gatherings I hadn't been invited to because my mother didn't want me to feel uncomfortable. The networking events at their house where my absence was explained away with a shrug. The holidays where jokes about my choices were framed as concern, and everyone laughed just enough to make it impossible to object without looking sensitive. I remembered standing near a fence at a summer barbecue while my father told a group of guests about my sister's achievements. He had laughed, then added something about me, something light and dismissive. Someone had patted my arm afterward, like I had lost something important, and they were sorry for me. That feeling came back now, sitting in that room. The tightening in my chest. The heat behind my eyes. The familiar urge to shrink. I focused on my breathing. Slow. Controlled. In and out. Across the table, my sister's fiancé was different. He wasn't loud. He didn't compete for attention. He listened more than he spoke. When my parents talked, he watched their expressions. When my sister told a story, he let her finish. And sometimes, when my mother spoke about me, his eyes flicked in my direction. Not with pity. With curiosity. He noticed the pauses. The way I didn't interrupt. The way I didn't rush to correct anything. The way my silence wasn't empty. I had seen that look before, in meetings where people realized they were missing information. My mother mistook my quiet for uncertainty. She leaned into it. "She just hasn't found her footing yet," she said. "We worry about her." Worry was another word they used like a weapon. My sister nodded sympathetically, like she agreed. I kept my gaze on the table, tracing a small scratch in the wood near my plate. Something solid. Something real. Inside, I grounded myself in facts they didn't know. My life was not unstable. It was not chaotic. It was not failing. It was simply not visible to them. I didn't share details because I couldn't. The work I did demanded discretion. Progress happened quietly. Agreements weren't public. Results didn't come with applause. I had learned to measure success in smaller ways. Signed contracts. Confirmed calls. Messages that said, "We're moving forward." There was no audience. Just momentum. Letting my family underestimate me had been safer than correcting them. It protected what I was building from their opinions, their interference, their need to control the narrative. That night, sitting in that room, I realized how deeply they had confused restraint with weakness. Then my sister's fiancé asked the question. He turned toward me, looked at me directly, and asked what I did. Before I could answer, my sister laughed softly. "It's complicated," she said. "She's been trying a few things." My father nodded quickly. "Very experimental," he added. "Hard to make a living that way." They spoke over me with ease. The fiancé didn't look at them. He looked back at me. "What kind of work?" he asked. The room shifted. Just slightly. I answered calmly. Briefly. He asked another question. More specific. More focused. I could feel the tension build as my family realized they were losing control of the conversation. Then he paused. His eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in recognition. And he said, slowly, carefully, "Wait, you're the..." He stopped. The silence that followed wasn't familiar. This one didn't belong to them. He stopped mid-sentence. Not because he forgot what he was saying. Not because he lost confidence. He stopped because something clicked. That pause stretched longer than it should have. Long enough for my mother to shift in her chair. Long enough for my sister to glance at him, confused. Long enough for my father to clear his throat like he was about to rescue the moment. But the fiancé didn't look away. He kept his eyes on me. And in that silence, I felt something unfamiliar happen inside my chest. Not relief. Not victory. Something quieter. Something steadier. Recognition. My father laughed, too loudly. "I'm sure it sounds impressive," he said, waving his hand like he was brushing dust off a shelf. "But Elena's always been private." Private. Again. My sister leaned forward, smiling in a way that was meant to smooth things over. "She doesn't like attention," she said. "You know how she is." They were trying to put me back in the box before the lid came off completely. The fiancé didn't smile. He leaned back slightly, studying me now with a different kind of focus. Not curiosity anymore. Calculation. The kind that comes from someone who has spent years learning how to spot patterns. He asked another question. Sharper. More precise. I answered with one word. The air at the table tightened. He nodded slowly, like he was confirming something he already suspected. Global, he asked. Yes. My sister let out a small laugh. See? Vague, she said. That's what I mean. No one joined her. The fiancé's attention had narrowed completely. He asked one more question. Technical. Specific enough that it would mean nothing to anyone who didn't understand the space. I answered without hesitation. And that was when he inhaled slowly and said, barely above a murmur, "Wait, you're the..." He stopped himself again. This time, the silence landed hard. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't confused. It was heavy. My mother's smile froze in place. Her hand, which had been resting lightly on my arm for most of the night, slid away as if she'd suddenly realized she'd touched something hot. My father leaned forward, frowning. "What are you talking about?" he asked, irritation creeping into his voice. The fiancé didn't answer him. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. The movement felt slow. Deliberate. He tapped the screen once. Then twice. His thumb moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for. When he turned the phone around, he didn't aim it at me. He placed it in the center of the table. The screen glowed softly against the white tablecloth. I didn't need to look at it to know what it was. My father leaned in first. Squinting. Reading. His expression shifted in stages. Confusion. Then disbelief. Then something like fear. My sister leaned over his shoulder. Her smile faded completely. My mother didn't move at all. This, the fiancé said evenly, is one of the most closely watched platforms in the sector right now. No one spoke. Quiet launch, he continued. Strong early results. International reach. Very little press. He glanced at me, just briefly. Not for permission. For confirmation. I gave a small nod. We've been trying to get a meeting for months, he said, still calm. No interviews. No public appearances. Just outcomes. My father's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Why didn't you tell us? He finally asked. The question sounded smaller than he meant it to. I looked at him then. Really looked at him. At the man who had spent years telling my story for me. At the man who had never once asked what I was building, only why I wasn't building it the way he approved of. You never asked, I said. The words came out steady. No edge. No heat. My sister pushed her chair back slightly. This doesn't make sense, she said. If this was real, we would have known. The fiancé turned to her for the first time. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. That's the point, he said. Something cracked in her expression then. Not anger. Not jealousy. Fear. The kind that comes when the story you've told yourself stops working. Around us, the noise of the restaurant slowly crept back in. Glasses clinking. Soft laughter from another table. The hum of a room full of people who had no idea what had just shifted. But our table felt sealed off. Like we were underwater. My mother stared at the tablecloth. Her fingers were clenched so tightly the knuckles had gone white. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. When she tried again, her voice sounded unfamiliar. We worry, she said weakly. I didn't answer. I picked up my glass, took a small sip, and set it down carefully. The movement felt final. Like punctuation. I didn't hide my life to surprise anyone, I said. I hid it because I didn't need approval. My father swallowed hard. The confidence he'd worn all evening drained from his face. My sister looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time and not liking what she saw. I stood. The chair scraped softly against the floor. The sound felt louder than it should have. I should go, I said. I looked at the fiancé. It was nice to meet you. He nodded once. There was respect in his expression. Not admiration. Not awe. Respect. I didn't look at my family again. I didn't need to. As I walked out of the private room, the silence followed me. Not the familiar silence of dismissal. This one was thick. Uncomfortable. Earned. The night air outside felt cooler than I expected. It brushed against my skin like a reset. I walked a full block before slowing down, letting the noise of the restaurant fade behind me. My phone buzzed once in my hand. I didn't check it. For years, I had imagined this moment ending with shouting. With apologies. With explanations spilling out all at once. Instead, it ended with nothing. And somehow, that was heavier. In the days that followed, the silence held. No group messages. No calls pretending nothing had happened. When my mother finally reached out, her voice sounded unsure. Like she was testing ground that no longer felt solid. She asked questions. Not about how I was. About what I did. About how long. About who knew. I answered politely. Briefly. I didn't fill the gaps for her anymore. My sister didn't call. I heard later, through someone else, that the engagement dinner became awkward in retellings. The story was edited. Details softened. My role minimized again, just enough to protect pride. I let it be rewritten. I didn't need credit. What surprised me most was how light everything felt once I stopped carrying their expectations. My work continued. Calls. Decisions. Progress. Nothing there had changed. What changed was the quiet inside me. The constant bracing. The need to prove myself to people who had already decided who I was. I realized then that resolution doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like clarity. Like knowing where you end and where other people's opinions begin. I didn't lose my family that night. I lost the version of myself that kept shrinking to fit into their version of me. And I didn't miss her. I used to think being accepted by them would finally make me feel whole. Now I know understanding myself mattered more than earning a seat at their table. That night didn't change who I was. It revealed it. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to see you best, you're not alone. Tell me where you're watching from, and share what helped you stand your ground. And if stories like this matter to you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.